Whitney asked as well, we have 58 people sign up.
Oh, awesome. Cool. Yeah. Cintia, I'm going to put you on spotlight now.
Sure. And then I can see here if people are coming in.
Yeah, I see people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just, hi, everybody. I just waiting here a little bit so more people will be able to join us. In the meanwhile, that would be nice to know where you guys are from and how is the weather, wherever you are, because I can tell you right here, it is a bit cloudy. So what's going on your end? Though you can put that on the Q&A. And I'm just seeing more people joining us. So I'm gonna wait about 2 minutes. If anybody has, can everybody hear me well and see me well as well? If you can put that on a Q&A, that would be good. Because I had some issues with my internet earlier. So I am really hoping that that's not gonna be the case during this awesome webinar that we have prepared for you guys. So I see.
Sorry.
It's 7 o'clock. I'm just gonna wait a few more minutes. Let's see what we have it in here. All right. Okay. So I think I'm about, I would just start right now. Thanks for coming. I am very excited to have you guys here to enjoy your night and afternoon, whatever you are. So I just want to present myself. My name is Cintia Vimieiro. I am a local representative here in Gothenburg, Sweden. And we have prepared a very nice webinar for you guys. So if you had attended our past webinar, welcome back. If you are new to our series, I really hope you enjoy. And I hope you can join us later as well. So I'm just gonna share my agenda really quick. So I'm just gonna talk very briefly about what the EIT is all about. And then at 7:05, we're gonna have our speaker and she will talk about enlighten you guys and how to unlock your sales. And she'll talk for about 30 minutes or so. And at 7:30, we're gonna have a quick, Q&A with some, I really hope you guys can ask some questions. And at 7:55, we'll have some closing remarks, some takeaways, and I'm gonna talk a little bit what we have in our pipeline. So a little bit about the EIT Health Alumni Network. So we are a very diverse group. We are multidisciplinary and of innovators and is done, we are made by the alumni for alumni. So the networks, the goal of the network is to bring together students, professionals, healthcare enthusiasts who share a common vision for creating positive society impact through innovation and entrepreneurship. So we're pretty open. We don't discriminate at all. So we welcome everybody. We are pretty big right now and we are growing. So I am one of the representatives, like I mentioned earlier, but we have about 30 spread all over Europe. Right now we have more than 2,000 members. And if you are not a member of our network, I really hope that towards the end of this webinar, you join us. I will tell you a little more in the end how you can become a member of our community. And I really hope you do. Usually before Corona, our events, they were mostly face-to-face, but because of coronavirus, now we're doing webinars like this. We did a few already, and we hope to do more. So when it comes to our mission is to support IT health by building an active network for alumni dedicated to activists to improve quality of life, active aging, and healthcare across all Europe. We have a big vision as well. Our vision is to become the leading European association of health, social, and life sciences professionals, entrepreneurs, innovators, and executives. I know most of you are familiar with Zoom, but for those that are not, I really want that if you have any issues with technical issues, you use the chat. And if you have Q&A, if you have questions, please use the Q&A box through the event. So we hope that you're gonna have many for Whitney. And also while I'm here, and just to get to know you guys just a little better, I have a poll that I really hope you guys can answer. I will just wait and I will share the responses with you as well. I'll just see what we have it in here. I'll just give a few more seconds for people to, I'm just looking, oops, sorry. Sorry about that. All right, so I see that most of you have responded already. Let's see what we have as answers. Just give me 1 second. Let's see if I can get that. Seems like I have a bit of a delay, like I mentioned, unfortunately, with my internet, but that's okay. I will share the answers with you guys later on. Oh, there you go. Sorry about the delay. So we have 80% of us being a startup funder and co-founder. That's really cool. We have about 60% that already had a prototype. Congratulations. And we have 50% of you over there. They're on early stages, pre-seed and seed funds. Cool. And now enough about me here. So I want to introduce our amazing speaker that we have today. So Whitney Sales is a native Californian. She's a business leader with more than 10 years of sales experience. She's also the managing partner at Accelerate Ventures and creator of the sales method. And for those that are worried, like I did before, yes, sales, it is actually her surname. So please welcome Whitney Sales.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and jump in here and share my screen if I could take over. I think you got it. You have to stop sharing yours. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So a little bit about me. Again, my name is Whitney Sales. I can give you a little bit about my background. I've worked in early stage SaaS sales most of my career. I first started straight out of college, actually launching new products. For at the time, the company was private. We ended up hitting, and then we IPO'd. We ended up hitting our annual sales targets for the new product that I launched in three months, which kind of set me on this trajectory of launching products. So I ended up launching another product for that company, which was on the Inc. 5000 fastest growing companies list. It was a company called LoopNet. The product that I had originally launched ended up being what we got acquired for by our biggest competitor. Then, you know, I just set down this path of launching new products. So the build phase and creative phase is really my wheelhouse. It's what I love doing. I've had 4 companies on the Inc. 5000 when I was working for companies. So fastest growing companies list, rapid growth is really what I enjoy. The last company I worked with full time, we were $1 million in ARR in just 8 months. And so over time launching products, I developed this methodology basically to work with founders at the early stage when they're trying to figure out what their go-to-market looks like. My background is in B2B SaaS, so I'm kind of industry agnostic. I've worked across the board in a lot of different industries at this point with hundreds of companies through the Accelerator, our seed fund, and then my advisory practice as well. So feel free to bring any questions that you have. I may or may not be able to answer them if they're industry specific, but I can gear you towards how to get those answers just through experience. So that's just a little bit about me. The point of this overall presentation, it's going to be how to structure a qualifying call as an early stage founder. Something Timo had seen through launch, and so he had invited me to join you guys. The point of this whole presentation, as an early stage company, you're really working with people who are going to be trying your product for the first time, and so your goal is to establish trust. And when you establish trust, your customer will actually tell you everything you need to know in order to buy, or to sell to them and buy the product, because that trust has been established. And so this general overview is some strategies that you can use as an early stage founder to establish trust. And I will be sharing this afterwards. Just feel free to add me on LinkedIn, and I will share my deck. I have worksheets I'll share. I'm very, very open with this content. I also have a bunch of articles that are going to be coming out that follow up on this content. So, you know, just go ahead and add me on there, and I'm happy to help. So this is a general overview for how I structure a qualifying call. The way I would frame this is when you're selling into a larger organization, mid-market to enterprise, where your sales cycle may be 20,000 and above. So if you guys are familiar with Chris Jan's, you know, cycles, you're looking at, you know, deer, brontosaurus, and then I think it's whale is how he classifies them from a deal size perspective. This can also be used if you are going to be selling your product through partners, or any distribution channels. This can be a good way to qualify that distribution channel and find out if they're a good fit for you, and also build trust with that channel that you may not have established. I like to start the call with establishing context for the conversation. This is going to allow me to control the conversation as a salesperson, even as a founder. So whether you're training a sales rep or you're the founder selling, managing and controlling that conversation is critically important. Next up, why they're on the phone with me, why I'm on the phone with them, and why they're on the phone with me. What it is we actually do, and then how it is that they're going to be buying. Just a quick overview of that. I like to keep my calls down to, I like to try and keep my qualifying calls, which is your call to establish a champion within your organization, to about an hour. If I can, I try and get that scheduled versus a half an hour, because you really need that much time to dig in. I should be talking about 20% of the time to 30% of the time, where the customer should actually be talking 70% of the time. It's going to sound like I'm doing a lot of talking here because I'm giving the presentation, but just some quick notes on that. So I do like to start the conversation with a laugh. My surname is a great one, just because it's as cheesy as they come, but something that happened that day, something I know about their company. Essentially what I'm trying to do through laughter is establish rapport, and not make the person feel like I'm just going to dive in and start asking them questions. So, and it's humanizing me in the relationship. On top of that, laughter actually increases your neural activity. So you're literally making the person smarter by talking to you. Hopefully that's something you want to do. Next up, I go into introductions, and I'm going through these in very detailed fashion because people forget things when they're doing these, even if you've sold before. So I like to start with how we were connected. If they responded to an email that I sent, what piqued their interest in the email? If it was a connection, how do they know that connection? That particular connection may be a good connection. It may be someone they don't know that well, and that's going to give you some indications of how high of a quality that connection is for them, and how much value it's actually going to give you in selling to them. Then I'm going to ask each person's name, title, and responsibilities. Responsibilities are critically important because titles don't always match to the same responsibilities within organizations. And so you need to start mapping out your ideal customer profiles, your ICP, and these will be critically important to you as you grow as an organization, because it's going to help you with your positioning, etc. And then confirming how much time I have, because if someone gives me more time, it's a really good buying signal. The other thing here is if I'm talking to multiple people in the qualifying call, also a really good buying signal, but I like to write down each person's responsibilities, because how the people interact with one another is actually going to tell me a lot about how they make decisions as an organization. So if there's a very senior person asking questions, it can be a top down. If it's a junior person asking a lot of the questions, it could be a bottoms up decision making, which you have to build more consensus versus just selling to one person who's going to tell everyone else what to use. So just some really good tips on that. Next up, I go into my agenda. I use a little bit of Sandler method in this one in building a consent-based agreement. So my goals for this call are to get a good understanding of how you guys currently do whatever it is that you're trying to understand around their organization. discuss how we might be able to help you with that. And if there's a fit, we can talk a little bit about what the next steps might look like. Sound like a plan? Great. Then I like to let people know how to structure their questions. Depending on the culture you're selling into, some people will just jump right in with questions. Other people will wait till the end. So you need to actually tell them how to engage. And so it's really important. So those are just some suggestions around that. And then also asking them if there's anything they want to discuss. How much research they've done on you ahead of time. Again, really good indicator on how interested they are and how educated they are as a buyer. Because you may be running a buying cycle that's educational to start, or you may be actually engaged in a real buying cycle. And so those are that's going to be a good indicator of that for you. And there's a quick script down here at the bottom that you guys can use. So next up is my founding story. And this is a really important piece of my general sales overview, because what this does is it frames you as a thought leader and expert in the space, and also frames the problem for the buyer. So I'm going to ask what they know ahead of time, like are you familiar with our organization and what we've done? And then I'm going to talk about what actually led me what experience led me to uncover the problem that it is that we solve for, how that problem actually impacted me. When I dug deeper, here are the things that I learned about the industry. So these are the trends that led to this discovery, and then what it is that we actually built. And if you have a before and after for your early beta customers, it's a great place to show that. And there's generally 3 slides that you're going to give on this. I have an article that it will be coming out in 2 weeks that actually go through this, so you guys can see that, and I'll follow up with that. You want to keep it short. You want to keep it data-driven and experience-based, but it's going to establish you as a thought leader, and also empathy for your buyer if you're telling them from your own personal experience on why you're actually solving this problem and why you built what you built. Always pause for questions after this, because they're either going to challenge you or they're going to dig in more. And again, digging in more is going to be a good buying signal, because they're trying to understand. You might be dealing with a skeptic or a teacher, either one from a buyer profile, but they're really good to understand. From here, I dive into my qualifying questions, and I call them value-based qualifying questions. My qualifying questions are different from my sales questions. So my qualifying questions are, what do I need to know if they're a good customer for me? So do they have the pain point that we solve for? Do they actually have money to spend on this problem? Is there something going on in the organization that is driving this type of decision around needing to solve a healthcare related issue? Are they revamping something that's going on in the hospital? Has there been some news around something that hasn't worked? Things like that can be really helpful in understanding and framing it. Framing the problem and understanding how urgent it is for them, and if they have a timeline that they're working on internally, because it's really hard to drive a customer's timeline. It's much easier for you to work with them on their internal deadlines and work backwards. And then the second thing I'm trying to understand in my qualifying questions is, what is the relevant case study that I can give this person? So when I talk about my product, what is another person who's used my product, or another beta customer who might have used my product, or another doctor who's used my product, that I can actually relate to this individual buyer, because that's going to build more trust, and that you can do what you said you can do. And then when I'm responding to these questions, what I'm doing is educating the buyer. So I'm always framing the problem and anchoring the problem in data and facts that'll help frame the problem in the buyer's mind. This helps to challenge the buyer's thinking around how they're currently doing things, so that to get them more open-minded around the solution that you might be offering. One thing I have in here too, just a tip at the bottom, is casual competitor name dropping can be really helpful in building credibility with your buyers, as long as they're not hyper competitive in your market. I know some people are like, they don't want, competitors using the same product, but most markets, it's validation. And so it can be really helpful, especially if you're selling regional groups and things like that. Next up, I go into a case study. So this may be where you give a demo of the product, if you give a demo on your qualifying call. If you don't give a demo of your qualifying call, what I'll actually do is I'll use a customer case study, either way, to walk my customer through the experience they'll have using the product through someone else's eyes that's relevant to them. So the reason I do it this way versus explaining features, benefits, is I'm explaining the product through facts of someone else's experience. And so even if you're still very early and you don't have customers, you can use beta customers because you've all tested your product with someone and you've all done customer discovery. And so you can talk a little bit about those experiences and what they got out of that and what the ROI for them was. You can also, as you start to profile your buyer personas, you're going to be able to map certain objections to certain profiles. And so you can use good customer examples to handle these objections. So that's something we actually hear a lot. Here's when we were working with this is what we actually found. So it's a really good way to handle those objections, and you can just do it through story. And story people relate to a lot more than you just describing what your product does. Next up, I go into my sales questions. So again, these are different from my qualifying questions. In my sales questions, what I'm trying to understand is what is the ROI that I actually offer to this buyer? So what is the benefits to them of working with me from a time perspective, from a number of people having to interact with this perspective, from a money perspective? You're trying to map out this individual buyer's day-to-day experience and how you can actually help that, and then as well as the organizational experience and how you help that. Because one, I'm gonna buy what helps me, but I also need to sell it into everyone else. So I need to craft both those stories. The more color you can give to this portion through the buyer actually explaining it, usually the more real and more urgent it becomes to that person. And when I'm going through these questions, what I'm responding with is, wow, I'm using words to enhance the pain. So, wow, tell me a little bit more about that. Wow, that's really, that sounds like a really lengthy process. Whoa, did you say 20 people were involved in that? What levels are you talking about? What are each of them doing on it? And so I'm getting more detail and color around the problems that the customer has. And at the same time, I'm mapping out in my mind what day-to-day looks like for them and what it looks like within the organization. And when I'm responding to this, again, I'm not pitching, because the pitch is actually what people get turned off by. What I'm doing is educating and just trying to understand. And since you frame the problem for them in the beginning in your qualifying questions, that framing is going to get them thinking about it as a problem already. That's kind of like the framing and anchoring the problem in their mind. And then it's whether they buy in that it's actually a problem. From here, I'm going into my ROI story. So my ROI story is the use case for them specifically. So I should have been able to get all that information from my qualifying questions as well as my sales questions, right? So I know their use case, and then I'm quantifying the problem through my sales questions for them. So our ROI story should tie back to, okay, so you said these, 7 people are involved in this administrative task. What our system will do is, 1, automatically collect that, 2, or schedule that, or put that together in an Excel spreadsheet for you, or manage that data system for you, or surface, flag potential issues, whatever it is your product does. You can tie that back to the ROI story. And if we look at this at a broader basis across the organization, I can see this playing out to save you guys X amount of time over the course of the month. We'll say, could probably cut out the administrative functions for three separate people to put them on more valuable activities and client-related or patient-related work. After you give this ROI story, you always want to pause for questions, because you're going to get 2 types of questions. One of them is process-oriented questions. These are buying signals, like what does implementation look like? What does your security look like, etc. The second set of questions are going to be value-based questions, which in that case, they actually object to whether the product is going to be valuable for them. And so you need to go back and requalify and make sure you understand what's important at that organization. And so it's just going to tell you which path to go down. If you get value-oriented, or excuse me, process-oriented questions, you can proceed on to the next step, which is mapping the buying process. So I use BANT for training. It's an old school way. There's a lot of different other strategies. There's MEDIC, there's CHAMP, there's a lot of different strategies. I like BANT for training people because it's a really easy acronym to remember. It stands for Budget, Authority, Needs, and Timeline. And I have some just general questions here that I think are pretty important. So budget, have you ever evaluated tools like this, or have you ever purchased a tool like this before? What was that process like? How do you typically evaluate tools like this? Is this something you have budget or resources allocated for? If you have a technical implementation, that is a very important part of understanding their budgeting process, what cycle of sprints they work on, and how they decide what goes into a sprint. Is there anyone else who needs to be involved in the decision-making process? What's their role and what do they care about? Notice I didn't ask are you the decision maker? Everyone's a decision maker if they have influence on the deal. But if you're looking for everyone to get involved, because after your qualifying after your qualifying meeting, ideally you're having a stakeholder meeting, which is going to be getting everyone in the room and aligning them on the value and KPIs of the product, as well as the buying process, because sales is two things: it's problem solving and project management. And then the last piece is timeline. Have you ever purchased a tool like this before? Do you have a legal process? And then it sounds like it's tied to this particular deadline. Is that correct? So we need to get it implemented by this date. Am I understanding that correctly? From here, once I've mapped this understanding, I actually like to repeat it back to the buyer to make sure, one, to show them that I'm listening, which is a really big trust builder for people. And then two, in case I missed anything, they'll add clarity. So we may need to get, actually, we're going to need to get an NDA signed before our next stakeholder meeting, for example, might be something. And then finally, I go over next steps. So this is where I'm going to go through. So here's what, so it sounds like this is your typical buying process within the organization. On our end, the next steps would be to actually schedule a stakeholder meeting with the key players. If you don't know who those players are yet, over time, you'll actually know that you should have, your hospital administrator, your security person, the CIO or something like that, and maybe your chief of surgery in that meeting. But if you don't know that, then it's just, we need to set up a time with all the potential decision makers involved. From there, we'll get an NDA signed ahead of that, so you guys can share openly and we can share openly. I'll follow up with you regarding the NDA, and then it sounds like you guys want, my send deck here, so I'll be sure and send that over to you so you have that circulate around your team with some of the key points that we talked on. Sound like a plan? Great. And then do you have access to those people's calendars? If you do, if they don't, no worries. I'll plan on circling back with you in 2 weeks to get, if we can't get that scheduled yet. Does this time typically work for you? Great. I'm just going to throw that on your calendar, and if we need to move it down the line, no problem. And then that's it. That's generally an overview for how I structure a qualifying call as an early stage company. Any questions?
Sorry. So thank you so much for the presentation, Whitney. We actually do have some questions. I have a question myself as well, so I'm going to be a bit selfish and start with that one. So my question is, do you say that we can conclude that the art of sales is the art of asking the right questions at the right time from potential customers?
Yes, yes, it is 100%, but it's also, it's sequencing the questions in the right way. So it's asking what your customer wants before telling them about your product, right? So you're trying to uncover, well, first you're framing the problem. So the customer's actually thinking about the problem if they weren't thinking about it in advance. Sometimes they just don't know what they don't know. Mm-hmm. And then you're framing the problem in their mind by asking the right questions around how they operate and how they're currently solving that problem, and uncovering the inefficiencies in that. And then you answer, now that you know what the inefficiencies are, when you start talking about your product, you can talk about it in relation to those inefficiencies that you've already anchored in data.
Awesome. Thank you. And I have actually tons of questions now that I'm seeing here coming from the audience. So the next question that I'm going to ask you is, what can our early stage founders do when they're, what can early stages founders do when there are not case studies yet?
Okay, so when there are not case studies yet, you want to get beta customers at that point so that you can get that data. So ideally, you're bringing on some beta customers for free, or if you've done customer discovery, you should have some data around why you built the product.
Mhm.
right? You have there's some foundation to the experience of why you built your product, ideally. You didn't build it in a vacuum, ideally. And so you can craft that story based off of that data. But I would encourage you to get some beta customers on board, maybe for free or on a free trial, or using your friend network or something, so that you can get some of those stories built up. Because there's a hub and spoke model when it comes to sales. There's a saying Paul Graham had, where it takes 10 to get to 100. It's because each individual use case is a spoke of 10 other customers who have that same use case. And so you need to build the stories that you build up are basically building up little market segments for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so you need to be building up those market segments.
Yeah.
And that can be it may mean getting in the hands of your customers for free.
Well, and since we're talking about customers, so my next question would be, what precedes a qualifying call with my customer or with my potential customer?
Yeah, so what precedes that is usually what you're doing from a demand gen perspective. So however you're generating demand, it could be email outreach, it could be Twitter outreach, it could be Quora outreach, it could be introductions through your network. It could be you're in a Slack channel and you're connecting with people on Slack. It could be following up on someone's video on YouTube online that they're talking about a particular topic. It could be, a whole slew of different things, just depending on what you're looking for as channels where your customers live, right? So I think one of the pre-questions was, how do you sell to someone who's 65, who doesn't read email, probably, and probably doesn't answer, maybe answers their phone, maybe, probably not. And they probably have a strong gatekeeper in front of them. The way you sell to them is getting in person. So it's a little bit harder to do these days without conferences and events going on. But those are the best way to get in front of people who are not super tech savvy. But you might find that some of them are trying to be tech savvy. And so in those cases, there might be some people who are active on Twitter. And that's usually an indicator of someone in a space that is not particularly technically advanced. If they are on Twitter, it's a good indicator that they're an early adopter or an innovator in their space. So that's a good it's usually a good person to approach. And then once you get them involved, that can be a good way to do it. The other is bringing on an advisor or something like that can help network you in for your first couple customers. And help you navigate those first deals because they already have established trust with those customers. Mm-hmm. And you're in the health industry, that's pretty important to do.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think you mentioned something on your answer that I think goes with the moment, because we cannot do face-to-face meetings anymore. We cannot have that connection. So in times like this, especially when it comes to sales and when it comes to establishing this relationship with your customers, so how are you dealing with that right now? And how much work you see putting more, let's say, making more calls or more emails, because we are in the midst of this online, I guess, approach to everything instead of a face-to-face meetings?
Yeah, so in an industry where you had to do face-to-face, one of the things that we're seeing, you have to lean a lot more on your network for introductions. Mm-hmm. Is going to be part of it, so that there's a credibility that's built if it's more of an old school industry. The other is in the healthcare industry, I know is really important, is actually getting published in journals can be really helpful from a brand credibility perspective, which is again why it's really good to have an advisor with deep domain experience in your space, who's a very credible source for you that you could do an interview with and get that in a journal, or can validate your use case and your technology. That's just important in general and health tech. But journals can be helpful, and finding introductions into your target market can be very valuable. If it's someone you already established a relationship with, but you can't get them in person today, or you can't go into the hospital, you could potentially do a social distance walk. I know a lot of VCs, for example, are doing that with people on their later deals, more Series B and Series C, where they're writing bigger checks. But that's a way. it also becomes more and more important to get personal in what you're doing. So don't try and scale up too quickly. You really need to do things manually, the same way you built your product manually and tested it. You need to test your process manually and see what's going to work, and get really personalized in your outreach, because those first few customers are pretty critical. So don't try and scale too fast. Do it the hard way. Figure out what's going to work, and then scale that up. You really just have to get creative. At this point, it's a little different for each industry from what I'm seeing.
We all need to be very, very creative, and I think for the most part people are doing a good job on that, because we have no other choice. We need to be creative in times like this. And
I was going to say, one thing that's also really helpful for getting people is potentially, instead of reaching out for a sales conversation, reach out for an interview for an article around your space, because that'll establish the relationship, and you naturally build rapport anyway. And that can help you lend some credibility for you and your brand, get additional eyeballs from that person who's more credible in the space, because you get to lend their credibility through the interview. And then you also build that relationship to be able to network into.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's very important. And I have another question here from the audience, saying, so from your point of view, right? So once you have established the relationship, you establish your credibility, especially looking to the needs and pains, right? I would even say that of your customer. So where do you see founders failing the most during the sales cycle? From your experience, since you have more than 10 years of experience, I'm sure you must see some patterns.
Yeah. So there's a couple places. One, not having enough empathy for the buyer. So you need to understand why the product is valuable for the buyer, and make sure through the buyer's own words, them telling you back why it's valuable. It's not like, if you're trying to push a product and explain like how it's going to help them, instead of them telling you all the information on how it's going to help them, and then you kind of like, okay, so I could see it potentially being beneficial here. Like, you tell me, if we are able to do this, would this solve that problem for you? It should be a back and forth, as opposed to like, you see it and they don't. And so it's really about putting yourself in the shoes of the buyer and understanding how the product's going to benefit them, and having a back and forth conversation around it. It's not about the product. It's actually all about the buyer's needs. And that will actually establish that trust. The other thing is not asking for the close. We get really shy about it, and just getting bold in your asks. The way I see sales usually when I'm training someone is they're over here and they're really uncomfortable asking for things. And then all of a sudden I'm like pushing them to ask. And all of a sudden they start asking all the time, and they're getting too aggressive and have to rein it back in. It's because once you figure out how to sell, it's really fun. I say that you're professional losers. You get really good at hearing no, but then you get really good at asking the same question in 5 different ways to get to your yes. And so it's fun. It's one of my favorite things is I deal with a lot of product technical founders who like despise selling and flipping their mind around it, where I get an email usually about like a month and a half later where they're like, it is so much fun. I was like, I know. I know, well, it's great.
I have to confess, I would say that I am one of those people. I don't see myself selling anything. And I was so excited actually to hear your talk, because during this quarantine, that's exactly what I've been doing. I've been trying to learn something about selling, meaning I need to sell myself as well, right? So I think is really, really cool. I think we all should learn. And that comes my next question, especially here in Europe, people are a little more shy when it comes, to selling and to brag, or, to be a little more aggressive. And how do you, like, the question that I have here is like, people are saying, how do I sell myself in a humble way? And I think that is a very cool question, because I'm from America myself as well. So I know it's a very different dynamic when it comes to how people interact and sell. So how do you see that? How's your take on that?
Yeah, so the selling yourself piece has to do with your founding story. And your founding story is really around your process of discovery, right? So what you did for that discovery. So I was a VP, you know, at this organization, and we were encountering this problem. And, you know, I was working on a technical side of this particular challenge. And, you know, it just seemed to me there had to be a better way. And so when I dug back, you know, when I dug into the industry a little bit more, I learned that, you know, the technology that people are using in this space is 15 years old, isn't designed for the current processes that existed. And we just needed to update them. There needed to be a better system. And so, you know, that's why I discovered, you know, we built this company, was really to advance the industry on what's available from the technological side, from AI, to save administrators a bunch of work, and then also have a better system of management for all of the doctors and hospitals, et cetera. So it's more around, when you explain it, you can explain it from a personal experience perspective, and conveying your passion for the space. And then the success in what you've had, and like obviously it's a really good fit in the industry because you've been picked up by, you know, 5 of the major hospitals. You know, there's things like that. So it's more using it in a factual way than like I'm a badass, right?
Yeah, no, that's I think is a excellent tip. And like you said, once you know you are a solo person, you're doing the sales mostly yourself because you only one person, but then you start to grow your venture, and then you have more potential customers. So when my question here is, when you think is the right time to hire the first full-time salesperson, and which factors should I take into consideration when I'm doing that?
Yeah. So first sales hire I always recommend for a founder is an SDR.
Okay.
Period. Like always hire an SDR as soon as you're starting, as soon as you've figured out the demand gen process, that like really tactical process of how you get leads going, hire a junior person to do it for you, because it's really grunt work and it's very time consuming. And they can send them from your email. They just keep you CC'd on or like a second email that's in your name, or you can have them do it in LinkedIn and things like that. But you basically want them as your like sales assistant,
Okay.
generating your leads for you.
Great.
And then you're working on your sales process, right? So the first step in selling is you have to figure out your demand gen process. So you're having a minimum of 5 to 10 calls a week. Even if, you know, your sale is 100K, like figuring out how to get that pipeline and that conversation going in the early days is critically important because it's your feedback loop. And that's what you're going to learn from. So you can refine your like initial core ICP you're going to go after. And then if you're having, you know, those 5 to 10 conversations a week, you can keep iterating on your sales process itself, right? But you first have to get that demand gen going, and how you're going to create a scalable demand gen that someone junior could come in and take over. Mm-hmm. The second piece of that is having a repeatable sales process. So you shouldn't make a sales hire until you know you can set that sales hire up for success. And that's my like number one. I get a lot of founders who are like, okay, we're ready to start selling. I'm gonna hire a salesperson. I was like, nah, don't you dare. Like, you're one, going to waste a ton of money, and two, you're going to lose that person 3 months later, because a salesperson is not going to solve your sales problem. You have to figure it out first, and then you put your salesperson in that role, because you have no way to judge if someone's good or not, or if it's that your product isn't it doesn't have product market fit or not. Like you have no way to judge like even what type of sales skills they need to have. So you need to be doing it yourself. Like, do you need an enterprise rep or do you need a mid-market rep? Like, what is the process that they need to have worked in before and sales and sold to before? And how will I know if they're a good fit for my customer or not? Not necessarily that they always sold into them. It's that they have a certain way of interacting with the customer. A customer might be a relationship-based customer versus more of a skeptical customer if you're dealing with engineering, right? So like there's a lot, you need a logical salesperson versus an empathy-based salesperson if you're selling into nursing, for example. So you need to know those profiles, and you're not going to know those profiles unless you've done it yourself.
Yeah. No, that's a very important point, and what ties with my next question here, because it's about timing, right? So a lot of people know that it takes a long time sometimes to close the deal, right? So, and they're asking here, so how, when this cycle becomes too lengthy between you and your potential customer, how to speed things up? Because how do you know that the deal is going to happen? So that's the question here. So do you have any tip on that? How long that should be? I know that varies,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, it does vary. So the gauge of whether a deal is moving forward is whether they are moving it forward in each action step.
okay.
So are you just getting back on the call with the same person and they're not involving other people? Or are they not getting you the information you need? So each step in the process, it should be advancing the sales process.
Yes.
That's number one. Number two, if a new person just keeps getting added in each time, what you need to do is stop, gatekeep your time, and say, it seems like there are quite a few people who are involved in this decision-making process. And I know that each of you guys has different priorities. And when it comes down to actually making a final decision on this and what success is going to look like, we need to align those across the team. So what I'm actually going to say we should do as a next step is get everyone on a single call and get them together so that we can outline, one, what the next steps will be, but two, how are we going to judge success of this? And that actually does build trust with the customer, because they're going to feel that you've got it managed for them, because they're probably trying to figure out how the hell to buy it too and aren't sure what to do.
Yeah.
And so if you say, usually we see this person, and this person involved, and if possible, I'd like to get this person involved as well. Not necessary, but they're going to be interacting with it, so I like to get their buy-in. And we can set up a next call just to get everyone aligned on this and what the process is going to look like, and kind of when, what, why on that particular call. And so it's a good way just to get it all together. Like, especially when there's multiple buyers involved, especially at a hospital, like, just get one call. It's going to be it's going to be a mess otherwise, because they'll keep just adding more people. And it's like, no. And then each of them is like, well, maybe you should talk to this person, or I already talked to that person. Okay, well, maybe you should talk to this person. Okay. And it's just like, it gets really messy because they're not great at managing their own internal processes for procurement. And so you need to manage that process for them.
Definitely. And just to step back a little bit, talk about this, back and forth, and especially if it's the same person, how do you, what do you think, or what's your tip that exactly what precedes a qualifying call? Because that could be an issue as well, right? So people are not even clear in what was happening at the beginning.
So, meaning I'm not sure, because usually a qualifying call is set up to, there's like interest peaked and you jumped on a call together.
Okay.
Around the product. And so what happens before a qualifying call is whatever that engagement was to get you that call. So it may be that someone introduced you to them. It may be, and your qualifying call is to design a champion. Maybe you got someone on the phone and they were too junior, and so you actually need to get up to a senior person. And the way you get up to the senior person is usually talking more strategically and talking over that person's head, so they think that you should be talking to someone more senior is usually the good way to do that. But it really depends on the organization. But a qualifying call is usually your first call to get yourself a champion. And if you identify that the person is not going to be a champion, meaning they can't help you navigate the buying process and can't answer your qualifying questions, then you probably need to get to someone more senior. And in that case, you speak over their head a little bit strategically, so that they think that you're going to make them look good if they bring you to a more senior person.
Yeah. And what would be then your best advice for B2G sales? I have somebody from South America asking that. So
B2G, I'm not.
I think it's B2B. Probably is a spelling, I would say,
Okay.
spelling issue here. So what would be your best advice for B2B sales?
That's a very broad question. For B2B sales, I mean, the biggest, I guess the biggest mistake I see early stage companies making, not in a sales process, is not focusing on a core segment of buyers that are most likely to buy your product right now, where they have overlapping networks. So people try and go sell to their entire TAM. When you try and sell to an entire TAM or SAM or SOM for that matter, but when you're trying to sell to that large of a group, one, there's a lot of conflicting product advice that ends up happening. Two, it's really hard to hone your messaging to meet the needs of that entire group. And three, your sales process and cycle is going to be all over the map. What you're trying to do in the early days is figure out 100, 250 buyers. If you have a higher, a 60K and above price point, that has the problem you solve for right now. How to identify them externally? Who are the internal buyers within that? Where do these people live and learn? What other tools are they using as well? And how do you actually talk to them in a way that they understand the problem that you're solving for? So that, like, what's the relevant benefit statements? And then what are the relevant, like, actual positioning of the product, so that you can map that out for that particular core segment. What that'll do is, number one, start to build this nice viral effect, because, we've all seen law of diffusion of innovation. Well, you're really looking for the innovators and early adopters in that group. And the tipping point in that is 16%. So if you're only going after 100 to 250 people, your tipping point is much smaller within that segment of the market. And so it's much easier to hit that viral element of that market, which also has adjacent markets to it. So it allows you to expand into another market and have proof points from that related market. So say, for example, you're going after regional hospitals and you want to go after, state hospitals. I'm just pulling this out, some number. You might be going after, like, the regional hospitals in this group, and then you're going to go after state hospitals. You might go at regional hospitals in Sweden, and then go after regional hospitals in Norway. There's going to be overlap between the doctors, et cetera, and administrators and board members. And so that overlap is where you start to build credibility and virality. And when you focus on a specific core segment, the language and product gets developed for that segment. And then when you're ready to go after the next segment, you just expand a little bit, right? And then go after, and you're going to get much faster go to market, because you're building credibility amongst a group of people as opposed to a wide range.
And so the question that I have here, and I think it will tied with that too, because if you already have your product, right? So it will make it easier for you to do those processes as well. So, but somebody here that has an early stage startup saying, what my sales strategy will differ if I am on an early stage versus I am already have my product on the market?
So, I mean, the difference is, before you have your product in the market, you're doing a lot of discovery to figure out who your initial segment should be and build relationships there. So you know who your first sales customers should be, and maybe even doing some pre-sales. Once your product is on the market, now you go back to the people that you were doing your discovery with and say, I built that product that we discussed. I would love to get your feedback on it. Feedback, not sell, at first, and then see if the customer walks themselves into a sale. And in that case, you start a qualifying conversation.
All right. And then I think we have time for one more question. And but I have much more, so I guess we'll maybe need to have a different webinar with you, with I hope we would have, because people are very much interested. The last question that I will have for tonight then will be that's a big one. How to grow your business 10 times? If you have any specific tips for that.
Yeah, so I actually talk to our founders about this a lot. Is you have to, so have a realistic goal to start. You start with realistic goals. And then once you've achieved that goal, double it and then double it again. So the big thing, you know, Google has this mentality of 10X. The 10X of business has to do with looking at your constraints to getting to 10X, right? So, and if you are consistently trying to double what you're doing. So say, for example, I'm looking at my demand generation and I'm struggling to get to 5 meetings a week. So, okay, great. Get to 2 meetings a week, right? And then it's like, okay, now next week, I'm going to get to 4 meetings a week. And next week, I'm going to get to 8 meetings a week. And then you know what? I need to figure out how the hell I'm going to get to 16 meetings a week. What that's going to force you to do is think through creative processes that are going to help you get there, and kind of thinking outside of what you've already been doing to try and scale it. Maybe bringing on a junior person. It may be bringing on some technology to help you. It may be starting to work on content. It really just depends. But what you're doing is it's not an immediate 10X. What it is thinking, starting to think, instead of doing what I'm comfortable doing and I know works, now let's try and double what works or triple what works. And like, what are my constraints to doing that right now? Because those are mental blockers for me, and knocking those out as bottlenecks. And that'll actually provide you with scale. So I had a founding team recently I talked to, and they're like, we want to get to 50 active monthly users by October. I'm like, really? You can get to like 500 by October. This is insane. We have one company that got to like 2,500 in like 6 weeks. So like when someone says that to me, I'm like, you need to get more ambitious for sure. That's like, I'm like, that is not, you are not thinking big enough, number one. But I understand the like wanting to be incremental and smart about it. But it's also about like, you just give yourself a goal, get to that goal, figure out how to get to yourself to a realistic goal that feels doable. And then it makes the next goal doable, right? And so if it's like, you know what, you're having a hard time selling right now, then maybe it's like, okay, I want to get 2 really well qualified customers on the phone this week. And I want to nail those qualifying conversations to get a stakeholder meeting. And if you nail those, then it's okay, now I want to nail these 2 qualifying meetings. And then like, I'm going to really understand that and map that buying process. Even if they're not a good fit, I'm going to just like nail that portion of the conversation because I really want to understand what buying processes look like.
Yeah.
It may like, it's just whatever you're struggling with, and really like hone in on doing that piece if that's where your bottleneck is. And then, you know, and then it's just improving it each time. It's just learning what you need to learn. That's how you 10X things.
But I mean, like you said, you have fun doing the sales, right? So you have that on you, and I can see why it's difficult for people. But I think with this webinar, you have gave us, myself included, a lot of good tips, and I think doable. That's the most important, because I think sometimes you get so scared of doing things because it's so complicated. But I really like how you explain that in a very simple, structured way that is easy to follow, even for a person like myself that never, you know, sold anything in a professional way per se. So yeah, I just want to say that it was awesome. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it.
I give everyone a tip: try to find fun in it. Honestly,
that's what I was going to ask. What would be the like 3 big takeaways that you can just tell us? Yeah,
try and have fun selling. It's actually a really fun, if you can turn it into a mental game for yourself, it's really, really fun. So that's number 1. Mm-hmm. You get total rush from selling. 2, so the gamification of it. 2, there's a really fun strategy that I like to do on calls, where if someone's being a jerk to me, I actually do a takeaway. So if someone's like doesn't want to share information with me, or like is kind of being a jerk, I'll say, you know what, it sounds like this might not be a good fit for you guys, but you can tell me, like, if there's giving you a bunch of objections, like it might not be a good fit for you guys, but you know, you tell me, you know, I don't want to be wasting anyone's time. You'll be surprised how often the buyer will actually talk themselves into the product because you're not pushing it on them.
That's amazing.
So that's another fun tip. And then the third thing is, yeah, it's gamifying it. So gamify it from numbers and then gamify it from a process. And then like, you'll be surprised what you can get away with. You'll be like, it's just like the things that you thought are hard, they're really in your head. And just so like, what is the thing I'm least comfortable doing right now? And just do that thing.
Sure.
And you'll grow it. It's like, I always say sales is a polishing machine. Like it's going to polish out all your rough spots personally, because you're going to get forced to deal with stuff that like you don't want to do. It works. It's true.
No, that's really, really awesome. I think that is amazing. So thank you so much for sharing with us. And we'll share your slides with our participants. And I'm sure we'll have you again if you're willing to come visit us virtually while you're here. So yeah, thanks a lot. So
yeah, my pleasure. And feel free to add me on LinkedIn, and then I'll share my deck with you as well. And then once you guys are on LinkedIn, you can see all the articles that I post too. And I have a book coming out eventually. So
yeah, so that will be, yeah, I guess I don't even have time for ask about that anymore. But yes, if you have any tips about books or anything, please feel free. If you have any, we'll be more than happy to hear your advice.
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure. I can definitely give some tips on reading. Sales Acceleration Formula is really good. If it's pricing, Price Intelligently blog is great. David Sachs for Entrepreneurs is a great blog for understanding sales models from a financial perspective and modeling that out. Those are probably some three. Like Sales Acceleration is really kind of like next phase. There's not a really good piece of content around like super early stage, hence why I'm writing the book. But those are the ones that I would definitely recommend for founders.
All righty, thank you so much. And I will do my closing remarks here for our participants.
Awesome, thank
you. Let me so I'm just gonna share there you go. So before I move forward here, I just wanna thank my team. So you guys are not seeing them, but we have a small army behind me. So we have Kushbu, we have Larissa, and we have Noor. Thank you so much. You guys are awesome. We are able to do very cool seminars because you behind. And also we have two amazing guys. They are, they are here for us with a lot of experience. Timo and Robin, again, thank you. When I mentioned at first about you guys becoming part of the EIT Health Alumni community, so now is the time. If you have your phone and if you want to do now, so you can just use the camera settings. You can scan the QR code in here, and then it's going to take you to our form for you to become a member. For any reason, if you have any issues with this right now, no problem. You can send us an email, or we're going to put some information on social media as well. But I really hope that for those of you that are not a member of our community, please join us. You can learn a lot, and you know, it's a wonderful network. I think it's very, very great. And also, since once you become a member of our community, you can send us your ideas. You can, you know, if you want to do a webinar like this, you can. We are super open, and we wanted that. We wanted the community to participate. So if you have any ideas for events, once you become a member, make sure to send an email to us, and my